Ooh, well, you know what? I'm not going to get in that water anymore. It's cold out there. It's cold everywhere. This is the Pacific Northwest, and it's still cold. So I'm Dorothy Wilhelm. This is the Swimming Upstream Radio Show, and we're going to stay in where it's nice and warm. You know, we're not dumb. We know what we're doing. But this is one of my favorite shows, and we are in. If Ray will correct me if I'm not correct now. He just lives to correct me. So I think we are starting into our 7th year. What do you think with Generation Gap?
I think that's about right. Yeah.
Yep. So in order to celebrate our 7th year, we are going to talk about death and dying. However, before we do that, let me introduce our guests or our regular crew here. As I said, and I stand by, and I'm Dorothy Wilhelm. I'm the host of the show, and I am a member of the silent generation, which meant that we didn't protest, we didn't take on, we just sort of crept in and out among the shadows. And I've been using this very same body for 92 years. Now, given that...
It's for an upgrade, Dorothy.
I don't think that's too bad. I really don't. So anyway, now that you have your coffee cup clutched to your face, introduce yourself, Ray, and the generation.
I'm Ray Miller still with the Millennial generation, which means we don't follow rules. We don't shut up. And he thought if we were bad, wait until Gen A and Gen Z come around.
Yeah, and you're pretty nervy, you know.
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty nervy, yeah. You get to know me well enough, I'm pretty nervy.
Well, I didn't mean you personally. Now, in the business, you're supposed to pitch to Jason.
Pitch to Jason. I'm sorry.
Fine. And the third member of our cast is Jason Falls, and apparently Ray has no idea why you're here.
Oh, like I see. I'm supposed to toss the ball. I'm supposed to pass off. I'm supposed to see sports. You can't do sports with me.
Sports analogy. Yeah.
The only sports I know is heated rivalry.
It isn't a sports analogy. Anyway, Jason, what generation do you belong to?
I am Gen X, and so we mind our business and don't really care what other people think about us. That's who we are.
And you don't care very much about other people. Now that isn't true. I started to say that, but you don't care. But you don't care this. You don't care the way we cared. I don't mean as much. I mean it's different.
Well, I think we're very protectionist because when we were children, we were really latchkey kids. We were thrown out in the yard after we got home from school and weren't allowed in until dinner time, and our parents never really knew where we were. So we had to look out for ourselves. So we learned how to look out for ourselves. And so we're a little different than, you know, the generations that have helicopter parents and 11th place participation trophies and all that stuff. If we lost, and we had to suck up our tears and deal with it. And so we learned how to do that.
You know what always amazes me about your generation? That's exactly how we were. So what happened was something changed in the middle there.
Yeah.
Because we were the same. We were out in the morning, gone until nobody wanted to see us. we were just out and going. But anyway, so we have these different and very different viewpoints. But Ray is had an idea or a thought he wanted to share for today's show, and so I'm going to now, Ray, pitch.
I still know. Well, I'm supposed to be talking to Jason. I'm really not sure here, but I mean, as we talked about earlier, my grandpa did just die on Sunday.
I'm so sorry. Sorry.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It happens. He went a lot quicker than I thought he would. So that was nice. Did not have to be there for more than 3 days. So that was pretty fantastic. But pretty much the moment after he died, I started to do my Ray thing, which was look at stuff. Because that's my big, I'm in an uncomfortable situation. Let me start pulling out books, flipping through folders. What is interesting that can take my mind off the fact that there's now what was once a person and now a body in the room, and it stinks, and there's no windows I can open. You know, I asked if there was an air freshener, and my family said, "Stop joking, Ray."
Oh.
Also, how I deal with those sorts of things. But I opened up his notebook, and I think it was one of the last things he wrote before he was not able to write any longer, and it was a note about his generation. I'm like, oh well, he dies on Sunday. I have my podcast 5 days later. I might as well share a little bit of what he wrote, which was fascinating, or the coincidence was fascinating. So if you would excuse me for 2 seconds as I look down at my phone to read this, he writes, having been born in October of 1932, October 13th, if anyone's interested, I made very little impact on my then limited generation world. Generally speaking, the generation to which I belong is pretty well behaved, not overbearing nor obnoxious in everyday dealings with one another. The give and take of attitudes that can keep life interesting without being stressful are being learned. The drama of the Depression and the war were being tolerated and learned from as I became a teenager, but not deeply affected by them. Culture of a generation is not easy to identify or explain. To me, my generation came at us in 3 major fashions. 2 I have already identified. Hold on, my phone is the Great Depression and World War II. The third was mixed in with the other 2 as it developed an insidious identity of its own, appealing to a global culture having many names or titles still in common usage. Among these titles are racism, prejudice, segregation, hate. None of the words are endearing, and they go on. Not too cheery, but I thought it was interesting that that was how he decided to write about his generation. And Dorothy, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, you read it like a newspaper man rather than like a grandson, and so it was a little hard to follow.
Was I too fast?
Yeah, and pretty clipped. So kind of review with me, what were the main points that he made?
He talked about how his generation was shaped by the Depression and the war, which makes a lot of sense. But then he expanded on the idea that the generation was shaped by racism and prejudice, which I thought was interesting. And sorry, Grandpa, but I got my own thoughts on that, and I think you're kind of incorrect there.
But Ray, my darling, we were there, you weren't.
That's true. Yes. So I want to know your thoughts on that.
I was born 2 years after he was, so same generation. Mm-hmm. And yes, and see, no offense, but you guys don't have a clue. And the funny thing is that as we talk, the 3 of us, Jason actually comes closer because the childhood was, the latchkey kid thing, and all that was the same. The helicopter stuff and all that came. Well, Gina generation was my daughter's, but he was absolutely, in the first place, thing one, and this is a newspaper man, a person cannot be wrong about their own life. What he saw. But yes, my God, if I were to say to you the things that I heard growing up about people of other races, you would flat fall on the floor. In fact, and I'm going to take a big chance, the first time I ever saw a person of color, we didn't say that in those days. We said something quite else. But the first time I ever saw a person of color was my dad worked for the railroad, and every year we got to have a pass to go to Oregon and visit my grandma.
Nice.
Okay, so we're on, and I'm about 3, maybe 2. And we get on the train and go to the dining car. And usually you're not allowed in the dining car, but we got to go to the dining car. And in the dining car, one of the porters was Black. And I looked at him in horror and I said, "Oh, Mama, doesn't his mama ever give him a bathy bath?" And you wouldn't say that today, my dear. And the nice thing is, and see, that was charming. I just want you think there was no prejudice. That was charming. And he laughed and he said, "That's all right." He said, "You should hear some of the things." And he knew that I didn't mean, I didn't mean it. So let's say, and I was interested that you would say, that you don't agree with him. You weren't there.
That's true. I do want to clarify that I don't think that, racism and everything started around then. And that seemed to be what he was writing about. I was like, I don't think so, Grandpa. I don't think so.
What I heard and what was true is the racism, actually attention to, as the guys came off the boats, Truman had just desegregated. When we were first married, we lived in a little double duplex in Baltimore. And we lived in one side of the house, and Joe and Ursula, I don't remember their last name, but they lived on the other side of the house. And we were both married about the same length of time, which was 3 days and a half. And we quickly realized that we were among the newly desegregated. And we quickly realized that it was we couldn't either of us cook, not at all. And that was way, way more important than what color we were, And she would come in. I remember she came in one day with a pie she had made, and it was supposed to be lemon meringue, and it had a peaky crust, came to like a church steeple in the middle of it. And she said, "It drowned." It was, I personally, I feel like, I'm sorry I didn't get to meet your grandpa. I feel like we were the lucky ones. And I don't think, the way things are going, I don't think it can ever happen again. But you see, we went through Pearl Harbor. And have I told you, I probably have told you, how I knew this is what I wanted to do with my life. Spend it with you two handsome fellows, of course, is what I'm saying. Was that we're sitting up on our porch in Spokane on the 7th of December, and the newsboys came into the neighborhood with Pearl Harbor bombed. And I've heard, and they didn't come out in the neighborhood every day. In the newspapers they do, or in the movies, but they didn't. But they did that day because it's important. And I thought, but you can bring the news out to the people. we can do this kind of thing. But mostly people don't know what happened. They don't know. And it's very easy for all of us. I know my kids do the same thing. It's easy to make assumptions about what happened, but it's almost never right.
No, it's not. My wife is listening to a couple of medieval podcasts, and the person that she's listening to is always crashes out about how people say that how the medieval times are so backwards, and like witch burnings and all that. And she's over here being like, we didn't burn witches until after the medieval period. The church didn't have a lot of power until after the medieval period. We went back in time from medieval to early modern when it comes to women's rights, church power, science, that sort of thing. So she always is like, oh my God, I can't. Medieval period was fine. It was much better in many aspects than the period that came afterward. But a lot of people make those assumptions about way back when. They assume science, technology, morals are a linear sort of thing that happened through history, and that is not the case.
That is never the case. Jason, have you got any thoughts yet? I'm waiting for you to have a thought, Jason.
Well, I've been fascinated listening to the two of you talk, and I think that the one thing that I can contribute here is, when I was young growing up, I have a slightly different perspective, I think, on the whole generational relationship with race, primarily because I grew up in the South. But I had a very different family than most Southerners. My grandmother, one of her best friends in the world, happened to also be the lady who cleaned her house. Her name was Estelle, and her husband Milton was the maintenance supervisor at the building that my grandmother worked in. And they were a friendly couple, but they also worked for my grandmother. And so my mother and uncle grew up in a household where African Americans were part of the family unit. They were friends. They weren't necessarily looked upon as servants, even though they worked for my grandmother, but they were friends, and their sons and daughters kind of grew up in the same school district and whatnot. And then later on, as I grew up, it was the same sort of thing. I knew Milton and Estelle, And my mother always had a group of friends that included African Americans. I grew up in a community that was Southern, and there was plenty of prejudice and plenty of, sort of unofficial segregation and whatnot in my little small town in Eastern Kentucky. But I had a lot of more diverse friends than my previous generations would have had for me. And I think that where my generation, I think, is the first generation that ever had to dealing with the impacts of systemic racism, because prior to Gen X, it was segregation. They're separate than us. And then, desegregation happened. Now, all of a sudden it's okay. Well, everything's equal. Everything's fair. Nobody can complain anymore. No, because you have the impacts of systemic racism, and the lack of education over decades means lack of opportunity, means socioeconomic differences, all that kind of stuff. So I think from a racial perspective, to borrow from what your grandfather started with this conversation, moving forward, generations have had to become much more skilled at dealing with much more nuanced impacts of race and race relations. And it's not just race too. It's also socioeconomic status. It's also religion. It's also much more diverse populations coming into the United States too. And so I think that's an interesting thing to look at over the different gaps in generations and how we deal with race, because the way I think of race is probably slightly different than how you think of it, Ray, but it's probably very different than how Dorothy thinks of it.
I'm not sure. As I've said, what's interesting is that I think our generations sound, I don't know if they are, but they sound closer than I would have expected.
Probably, yeah.
My memory, and there's a lot of not so good memories, but I remember the pictures of the troop ships coming home. And that was the first time, we had really looked at soldiers of color with, with the others. And it was very moving. It's so interesting when we look at what we've been through. And then since I've had the opportunity to live in other countries extensively, it's much better than if you visit, you just go home and that's it. But the Chinese, to my mind, do the perfect. This is the way you remember people. Oh, okay. This is 1962. We are when we went overseas to Taiwan, we took our chest freezer, because in those days we had chest freezers. You may wonder what chest freezer.
Like a cooler? Like a cooler? Like you fill it up with ice sort of thing?
No. But it is, rather than the standing freezer that we have now, they opened like a chest. Therefore, when Grandma died, if she didn't die on the right time, you put her in the freezer and then you close the lid. And then she stayed in there until the right day came. And you got someone to tell you. I thought it was wonderful. You get somebody to tell you what the right day will be. And this is very serious. It's very serious. And when the day comes, they have all of the neighborhoods. Now, I haven't been there. Remember, there's 62, and I don't know that it's like that anymore. But they were stages in all the neighborhoods in the vacant lot. So everybody would go. The plus is she's been in there a while. We're not as sad as we were. And so, we've had time to mourn. So they bring Grandma out and they put her in a chair. And now, here is the beauty of it. All of her favorite entertainers come and entertain. And it is a giant pai, which is a party. A giant pai. Now, to believe me, I think they have so now they remember the persons, and the master of ceremonies will, say things about their life and all that. Now they are remembering the person with joy. And then they put them in a little urn and put them away. But I just think it's wonderful. It's
a nice big party. I like that.
So yeah, it is, but it's got to be the right day. It can't be the wrong day. So I guess what I learned from that was there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, So what would be the best way in your thought? How do you think your grandpa would like to be remembered?
That is a really good question, because I feel like not a lot of us knew a lot about our grandpa. I mean, he suffered very much from being a a silent generation man, which was being unable to talk about his emotions, unable to make connections. I mean, I don't think he made a single friend as soon as his wife died. I'm not even positive they were much friendly, him and his wife, by the time she died. But it does seem that, and I should say, this is something that I think that I want to do when I get to be at this stage of life, which is kind of tell my kids how to care for me, because I feel like that's going to give them an idea of the kind of person I was. Because my dad was the only caretaker, even though he has a brother, and he didn't quite, I don't think he quite knew how to take care of my dad, because he didn't quite know what my dad liked.
Yeah.
So he read him some stories that my grandpa had written, kind of like the notes that I had read to you guys, but he had, stories about his first drink, that sort of thing. It was a Singapore Sling, because that was the only drink he could think of when he went to a bar, and he said he didn't like beer, so he got a Singapore Sling. But then otherwise, like, trying to nail down what he was like or what he wanted to be remembered for was really difficult. I couldn't even tell you what his favorite food was.
One thing I'd like to ask you, though, is had he been in the military during the war? No,
he was not a military man. He was in the armed forces at some point, but not during the war. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they didn't talk about anything. That was the release of the silent generation thing. So anyway, we have now managed to bring ourselves down to the last minute. I know you're going to find that hard to believe, but because you've done that, you notice how I assess blame. So tell us what this is. Obviously, this has been very meaningful, and I really appreciate your bringing your grandpa's thoughts to us. But what have you got from it? What have you and Jason? You be thinking about this too. What?
I want to, when I get older, make sure that I continue to have connections with my family, with my parents, with my kids, and with a lot of my friends. I was talking to another friend of mine yesterday, and she was just asking, like, why do I do this? Why do I not reach out to talk to my other friends about the hard things? Why do I not respond to my friends when they reach out to me? Why do I do this? I'm like, we are very isolated people right now, and it's an active effort to make those connections. But if you don't do that, you are going to end up like my grandpa, which is with nobody around you except the people who love you but don't really know you. So if you want to be remembered for more than just a couple of notebooks and a binder of your family lineage, then you got to put in the work now. Got to do it now.
Ray, that would make a wonderful essay. I could just see, which we could put it a lot of places, but a couple of binders and notebook and just because this is a fault of our generation. No, I don't get to be in this generation. Your generation, I think, is that we don't take the time to know each other. What do you think, Jason?
Well, I think I totally echo everything Ray said, and I feel like as the generations, as we go down in age and generations, I think we're generationally getting better, because I know my generation, Gen X, we're at the point now, I'm helping my father find an assisted living facility. And I'm talking to my father and my mother. Do you have a living will? Do you have a power of attorney? Do you have all of these things arranged? Because it would be really harder for me to have to deal with all this if you go and you don't. And I think my generation, I think, is going to be much more prepared for their senior years than previous generations. And as Ray has attested on the show today, he plans on being much more prepared than even my generation will be. And I think having those emotional, hard conversations and getting to know people on a much more interpersonal level within your family and friend set before you go is something that's much more of a higher priority for most people these days. And that's a refreshing thing. I don't think that as many people, certainly there are going to be plenty that still have the issue, but I don't think as many people are going to find themselves in that situation where when they pass, their family and friends don't know them very well, because we're getting better at this. but we have to be consciously aware of doing the work now to be better at it.
I think those are all excellent points. I would really say, one thing I do tell people as you're looking for, what the next step is. And my son said to me, "Now, Mom, don't make us worry. Go ahead and make the decisions early enough for them to do some good." And my own tip is find the place that lets Dorothy be Dorothy, or that I'm still doing everything that mattered to me.
Yeah.
And so that makes a big difference in what you do next. But I'm going to share to close. This is something I've never told anyone before, but here are my dearest friends. Why not? I'm thinking of, people you don't know. Well, the morning my husband died, we had communion together. And I want to tell you, when you're at that point, it's not a cheerful thing. And it is, and I'm sitting there, my daughter, all the adult children are there. And he turned his head toward me and I said, "I love you." And my daughter, who's an RN, said, "Mama, don't hold him back. He has to go now." And it was almost like seeing a butterfly fly up the corner of the room. And so it was like, it almost wouldn't have mattered. That was, I still have that to keep. So I think that, I guess where I'm going, in case you wonder, where is she going, is I think that, there's a lot more for us to learn, but this is by far not the whole story. So this has been pretty good, and I'm sure we've all cheered you up a great deal. We always like to do that. And so we want you to plan to be with us on Generation Gap next month at this time. And I'm sure many interesting. And Ray, I'm going to put you in charge of a cheerful subject.
There we go. Cheerful subject.
Wonderful. So this has been Generation Gap. This has been Ray Miller. I'm not going to be able to say it all. Ray
Miller Still.
That's right. I was just looking to see if you knew. This has been Ray Miller Still. This has been Jason Falls. And this has been Dorothy Wilhelm. I'm going to get out of this place. These shoes are killing me. See you next time.